Diesel Production.
Knocking those times, showing toss of rhyme. Knocking those times, showing toss of rhyme. Knocking those times, showing toss of rhyme. I'ma come through and show my wit line. Knocking those times, showing toss of rhyme. Knocking those times, showing toss of rhyme. Knocking those times, showing toss of rhyme. I'ma come through and show my wit line. Knocking those times.
Yeah, we back at it, man. Y'all know how we rocking, bro. Y'all know exactly how we rocking, man. 7 gang, Source Gang over everything. Listen, man, it's been an eventful week, man. I had to take care of some business last week, so I wasn't near the computer, but we were able to accomplish a show. If you guys are not in the know, I was on Berea's channel when Tail Ministries was on the channel. I jumped on the channel for corrective purposes. I heard some things that I didn't agree with. I wanted to come on and correct it. When I got on there, corrected the misunderstanding of these two individuals known as Teo Ministries. These brothers got upset. So now these brothers are going around the internet, going on Facebook, saying that it was all a sham, that me, Abu, Orthodox Moor, we all got together and jumped on this brother. He's a victim. You know what I'm saying? And this is the type of gaslighting that Israelite camps do. You know what I'm saying? If you guys know me, you know my background. I've been in the Israelite camp. I've been with IUIC before. I've been with those guys. I know how that situation is, where you can never tell them their faults. They always try to revert it back on someone else. But right now, we're dealing with the realm of education. And in the realm of education, I don't care about your feelings or your emotions. I'm just going to open the source. If you've been following me for a while, you know this is my MO. This is my stilo. Chris Harris still made claims. I went right to the books. Brother said, hey, this book, it's got a bunch of white Jews in it. I went straight to the page where it said there were seen many Negroid Jews amongst the Mohammedans in Algiers and Tangiers. I just go to the source. I don't got time for this petty stuff. Just go right to the source. And Randy X, you said for clout or for edification, brother. When the hell did I ever do anything for clout? If anything, my channel is unpopular because I do the opposite. I challenge the norms. I challenge the fads. I just went against half of my damn demographic on YouTube. I got a lot of Hispanic brothers that watch me. They didn't like that Hispanic genetics breakdown. They didn't like the fact that I denounced the 12 Tribes chart live. They didn't like that. I don't do shit for clout. I don't care if you don't watch my channel. If you unsubscribe today, I won't lose sleep. YouTube is not my job. You understand? I do this because I have a passion for science and the education behind it. That's why. And I want people to be informed, not disinformed. I don't do it because I'm trying to get members. I don't do it because I want a large viewership. I don't do it because I want a name. I do it because I care about the information. That's why. So when Randy X says for cloud or edification, all of my videos are for edification. Whether you like it or not. You Negroes don't want to support school. You Negroes don't want to support upper mobility. I make videos about school and upper mobility. You Negroes want to ignore political affairs. I make videos about that. Those videos run you away from my channel. It don't bring you towards it. Because I understand this. The few that are going to get it, they're going to get it regardless. And it's going to help them. So if I can help one or two people, fine. I'm okay with only 2 viewers. As long as I'm being beneficial in some way, some shape, form, or fashion. So I never done anything for clout. I do it for the sheer love of education. And what these brothers Teo Ministries are doing, they're pushing anti-intellectualism. Like majority of pro-black, a lot of you pro-black brothers, and that's all you are. You just substituting the word black with Israel now. All you are is pro-black. You don't care what that person does, what that person says, as long as he's black, he's infallible. That's how you guys think. I don't roll with that, bro. You understand? I don't rock like that at all. Y'all know how I do on my channel. You understand? I don't care if it's the popular opinion. I don't care if everybody rocking with that. Ron Dalton got a huge following. You just seen me debate him. A lot of people got upset with me behind that. A lot of people got upset. You understand? I done been in the ring with all these guys. Garfield, then beat up on Chris Harris and his little pseudo squad. Then beat up on Ron Dalton. Beat up on G Con. I beat up on all these guys. I got so many enemies on all sides and walks of this thing you call YouTube, or the community you call YouTube, on YouTube. I don't do shit for clout. I'm not trying to be friends with y'all. I'm not looking for companionship on YouTube. I get on YouTube to bring forth source material. That's it. If you look at my older videos, I had a larger viewer base then. I think my highest grossing video was 100,000 views, and that was on Black Britons. But I don't support a lot of the things I was bringing out. I kept researching and falsifying my information like a good scientist or scientific-minded person would do. Drop the 12 tribes chart. I understood the diversity amongst Hispanics and Native Americans. They are not all the same. Not all of them are related to us. Okay? So for you to come on here and ask that question and say, oh, well, that's what they're posing. Of course, that's what they're going to pose. They're trying to say any damn thing to get the heat off of their ass. That's it. But guess what I'm going to continue to do? I have all type of accusations levied towards me. I don't give a damn. I am the head chairman of the I Don't Give a Damn committee. Y'all understand me? I don't care about the popular opinion. I don't care about the fad. I don't care about rocking with 100 niggas. I do not care. I'm going to teach the most effective way I can and give y'all the information and resources so you guys can verify it yourselves. You see it on the screen. These guys want to be cult leaders. Tail Ministries want to indoctrinate you. That's it. They just want to tell you some shit, and you better rock with it because they believe in their mind that God gave it to them, or the angel Gabriel came down and handed them the understanding. And if you go against them, you're going against God. This is the same thinking, same mode of thinking that you encounter in the Israelite camps. I'm sick of that shit. So every chance I get on my platform where I have a voice that I'm going to speak against it. I'm sick of anti-intellectualism. I'm tired of that shit. Everybody's against advancing ourselves in STEM. Everybody's against advancing ourselves in the educational field. You understand? So if you speak against that, I'm going to use my channel and my voice to speak against you. That's it. So today we're going to read material to show you why Tail Ministry is wrong about autosomal DNA. Because all these brothers are trying to do is keep the modern concept of race alive. Black, white, and everything in between. They want to keep that alive. These things have no biological basis. Just because you're African American doesn't mean you're related to every other African American. Does not mean that. That does not mean you share a common male ancestor. It does not mean that. That's a farce. Then you have people saying, well, all that matters is the curses. A curse is not a genetic test. Saying someone falls under the curse. I was speaking to someone on Facebook today, and she said, well, the curses are all that matter. Okay, so what about the North Africans, the Moroccans? What about the Algerians that got caught up in the slave trade too? And got oppressed in the slave trade too. Oh, they bought their freedom. Okay, what about the freedmen? What about the people that paid and bought their own freedom in the antebellum South and in the North? What about them? I guess they're not Israelites then. Because you're making up shit and making up parameters instead of using a rigorous source or something that's more stringent that we can all look and examine and observe and say, okay, this is concrete. Let's go off of this. You want to go off your interpretation, which is limitless. You can just say anything in your mind. Okay, well, the Israelites have to have cornrows. If you ain't got cornrows, then you ain't an Israelite. That's not based on any damn thing. That's based off of you pontificating. The curses. All we need is the curses. Deuteronomy 28, brother. Okay, well, Native Americans, Hispanics, American Negroes, Australians, even the Chinese before the Han Dynasty. Let's see who else fit those curses. Whoever been oppressed, got their names taken from them. The Mongol Empire was known for they oppressed so many people. So I guess everybody in the goddamn world is Israelites. Because you can't delineate anything because it's all about curses. Then it's based not just the curse, it's based on your interpretation of the curse. So when you have these people preaching and proclaiming, because that's what preach means, to proclaim, and then pontificating, how are you validating this? Well, it's in the word, brother. Okay, it's in the word. We'll read the word. Okay, this is ambiguous. This can apply to anybody. Oh, well, you don't believe in the Bible. No, I just don't believe in your bullshit. I don't believe in your bullshit. How about that? That's the unpopular thing to say, right? For the person that said I'm clout chasing. A lot of y'all gonna click off this video when you hear me say that. I don't believe in you guys as bullshit. A lot of y'all are full of it. And I'm not gonna bite my tongue on that. Tail Ministry's full of it. They got called out on their faulty methodology. They basically came on the record and said, oh, why DNA cannot be used for descent. And that's the primary purpose why DNA being used as descent, to trace descent on the patriline. But you want to go against that because you're haplogroup G. You're Europeoid according to your genetics, according to your paternal line. You most likely are the product of a slave master and a slave maidservant. That's your genetic legacy. Am I condemning you for it? No, it's the truth. A lot of people that have European DNA, a lot of you African Americans with European DNA, one of the explanations for that is introgression through slave owners, European slave owners. You understand? Exactly. If they were E markers, there would not be a problem. Exactly. It's all because they found out they were haplogroup G. Now it's a problem. I keep telling you guys, you've been watching my channel, you know what the word haplogroup means. A group of individuals that share a common ancestor. I'm haplogroup E, EU290. I'm not directly related to someone with haplogroup G. We're not the same, even though you would categorize us as African American. See how that works? African American is not a biological unit. When you and your mom and your dad got together, he didn't fill her womb with African American genes or cells that were labeled African American. No, that's not what happened. That's a concept. That's a construct. Why DNA transcends that. But they're trying to say, well, it's all for autosomal DNA, which I've already accomplished and finished the video explaining autosomal DNA, but we're going to touch on it again tonight and beat this thing home. And someone in my comments said that before he learned his lesson, we taught him autosomal DNA is limited. Y chromosome DNA is not limited. It's unlimited. Autosomal DNA has a range about 5 to 8 generations, 200 years, 300 years tops. That restriction doesn't apply to Y DNA. Autosomal DNA is DNA from ancestors in general. Y DNA is on the patriline. It's from father to son, father to son, father to son, all the way back to the main male, like my haplogroup, the male that first transmitted EM96 or the basal branch of haplogroup E. There's no argument there. G2A4 and Otzi the Ice. Yeah, that's what they are, G2A. And they related to the Iceman. Yeah, man. That's a fact, bro. So when we dealing with the science, man, keep your religious and dogmatic thoughts to yourself. You're trying to alter, and I always tell people, your theory should alter and bend to the evidence. The evidence shouldn't bend to your theory. I always tell people that. Because you don't want the evidence to be what the evidence is. You want to bend it and contort it. Oh, why DNA? These brothers are on camera saying why DNA is not used for descent. What book have you read? And then they said, "Oh, I got an email from who? Oh, we can't show you the name of the guy we got the email from." I said, "You can look up the people I show. You can't even verify these people." Then something about you guys were behind Richard Katz. I don't know nothing about that, but all I know is no one could verify that that guy existed. Yeah, G2A4 and Auntie the Iceman are black African Israelites. You are wrong, sir. Yeah, all of haplogroup G is Israelites now. You know what I'm saying? They black Israelites. And that's the danger of trying to put race first. Oh, this modern concept of race and trying to apply it to the Bible or trying to apply it to genetics. It does not work. It's not compatible. It doesn't work. You understand? Because we know where G2A was found. And we can get into that. You understand? We can get into that all day, every day. But their assumption and what they were pontificating on, oh, the best way to use DNA and verify who Jacob is through autosomal DNA. Can you source that, please? Oh, well, how do we find out? If we get the bones of Jacob, we'll test his autosomal DNA. You think Jacob's bone is, if we did have Jacob's bone, let's just speak this hypothetical, right? Let's speak to it. If we did have Jacob's bone, you think that he would have 80% sub-Saharan African DNA? Think about that. Where did Jacob live? Who did he interact with? Who did he have sex with? Who did his parents have sex with? This is how you get autosomes, through sex, through reproduction. Did he have sex with the locals of sub-Saharan Africa? Did he marry the Bushmen? Was he interacting with the Khoisan? Was he? Why would he have an autosomal estimate with 80% sub-Saharan African like some of you African Americans do? Why would he have that if he's not even in the region or around those people that carry those autosomes? If you know anything about E1B1A, if you know anything about that, you can go to ISOGG and verify this. We came from the north down into sub-Saharan Africa. That's when we start admixing with the locals of sub-Saharan Africa and picking up those autosomes. Before then, we didn't even have the same phenotype we have today. I've covered this in prior episodes. Covered this already. So if you've been following us, you've been following the YAP movement, you already know this. We wouldn't be, if you look at the Ibero-Maurusians, they're 66% Near Eastern autosomally. 66% Near Eastern autosomally. And less than a third sub-Saharan African. What's true today is not going to be true 3,000, 4,000 years. So if we did find Jacob's bones, more than likely, his autosomal makeup is going to be Near Eastern. It's not going to be sub-Saharan African. Then what? Then what? This is what happens when you don't understand the subject matter. When you don't take the time out to read and study. I'm sick of you niggas, man. This is why Ron Dalton exists. This is why Teo Ministry exists. This is why IUIC exists. And down the damn line. I don't care if you were Israelite. That don't save your ass. That don't prevent you from rebuke. That don't prevent you from being corrected and your doctrine being dismantled. Oh, we're all Israelites, brother. Let's just stick together. I'm not sticking with you dumbass niggas. I put that in your pot and smoke. All right, man. I did enough ranting. Let's get right to the meat and potatoes of this. You know what I'm saying? But before we get into the lesson, I'm going to need y'all to do one thing for me. I'm going to need y'all to do one thing for me. Please apply this principle.
Hi, everybody. Time to use your noggin. How do you use your noggin, you say? Well, here's how you use it every day. Use Use your noggin when you write a letter. Use your noggin when you make it better. Use your noggin when you play guitar. Use your noggin to spot a star. Use your noggin when you make a scene. Use your noggin when you mix up green. Use your noggin to play a game. When you use your noggin, it's never the same. Use your noggin to sing a song. Ask another noggin to sing along. Use your noggin with your computer. Hey, that's Z. What could be cuter? Use your noggin. That's what it's for.
I'm using my noggin.
Are you using yours?
For the viewing audience, are you using yours? Don't be like Teo Ministries, man. A lot of y'all have become complete dogmatic zombies. You understand? Complete dogmatic zombies. And I still hear false doctrines and misreadings of Deuteronomy 23. Oh, if you want to be an Israelite, you just got to, after the third generation, you magically become an Israelite. That scripture doesn't say that. It doesn't say that at all. Where the hell are you getting this from? I'm telling you, man, you guys are preachers, bro. You guys are preachers. You might as well join the UA. Go back to Christianity. And that's real. All right, so our first source, you know what I'm saying? You know how we rocking, man. We're just going to go to the International Society of Genetic Genealogy and read what autosomal DNA tests entail. Then I'm going to go into my books. Okay, we're going to read about that and learn about autosomal DNA testing tonight. That's what we're going to do. We're actually learn about. I'm not going to preach to you. I'm not going to pontificate to you. I'm not going to prophesy to you. I'm not going to sit up here and say Deuteronomy chapter 28. I'm not doing that with y'all. If you're expecting that, click that unsubscribe button and stop watching my channel. I don't do shit. I don't do that shit. Go to subscribe to Teo Ministries if you want that type of goofy ass content. Go subscribe to Ron Dalton's channel if you want that type of goofy ass content. That's what you do. Here we deal with source material. Anyway, let me share my screen. Go straight to ISOGG Wiki. And we're going to read what this says here. And we're going to learn tonight. I'm going to need you guys to use your noggin. All right? Are you using yours? Autosomal DNA is a term used in genetic genealogy to describe DNA, which is inherited from the autosomal chromosomes. An autosome is any of the numbered chromosomes as opposed to the sex chromosomes. Humans have 22 pairs of autosomes and 1 pair of sex chromosomes, the X chromosome and Y chromosome. Autosomes are numbered roughly in relation to their sizes. That is, chromosome 1 has approximately 2,800 genes, while chromosome 22 has approximately 750 genes. There is no established abbreviation for autosomal DNA. ATDNA, more common, and AUDNA are used. Autosomal DNA testing. Autosomal DNA tests for genetic genealogy are provided by 23andMe, Ancestry DNA, Family Tree DNA, Family Finder, Living DNA, MyHeritage DNA. All the genealogical DNA tests give you matches with genetic cousins and also give you admixture percentages. Now, let me see if you guys use your noggin. So far, we've read what autosomal DNA testing does. What part of this did I read? Autosomal DNA can determine if you descend from a paternal ancestor. Where did I read that at? It does not say that here. What test do you need to determine who your direct paternal lineage derives from? A Y-DNA test. So if we're claiming to be Israelites, we purport that a man named Jacob lived. Jacob would have a Y chromosome, right? Jacob is a paternal ancestor. How do we determine if we descend from Jacob? Do we use autosomes or do we use Y-DNA? I'll let y'all figure that out. It says all the genealogical DNA tests gives you matches with genetic cousins and also give you the admixture percentages. 23andMe and MyHeritage also provide health and trait reports. 23andMe health and trait reports are only available in certain countries. The tests for Family Tree DNA, Living DNA, and MyHeritage are sold worldwide. This is more information about where it's sold or whatnot, where it's available. So we're going to skip that. We're going to go straight to the accuracy of tests. Autosomal DNA tests can be used to, now I want you guys to listen. I want you guys to use your noggin on this. We're dealing with the usage of autosomal DNA tests, right? Autosomal DNA tests can be used to confirm relationships with high level of accuracy for parent/child relationships. Parent/child relationships. This is when you use autosomal DNA. This is the paternity DNA. Why? Because you get 50% of your autosomes from your mother and your father. So you should have a greater autosomal similarity between your mother, father, and also your siblings, any first degree relative, because if they come from your mother and father, they got that same amount of mixture, or roughly around about. So you can tell, okay, yeah, either the mother, father, brother, sister. But since we're alive, we can tell who's the mother. We can infer who's the father, right? That's what that is used for, parent-child relationship. Now I'm gonna ask the audience a question. Is Jacob your parent? Is Jacob your child? Is he a first degree relative, or is he a distant relative? Obviously, he's a distant relative. You can't use an autosomal DNA test to confirm a distant relative. Okay? Use your noggin. Let's keep going. In all relationships up to the second cousin level. Do you see that? This is what it's useful for. Maybe I should read it again, because some people, that dogmatism in their mind is so strong and it's holding like, no, don't listen to what's on the page. Don't listen to it. Go back to just believing in Deuteronomy 28 and your faulty ass interpretation of it. Yeah, just go back to ambiguity. Just deal with that. Autosomal DNA tests can be used to confirm relationships with a high level of accuracy for parent/child relationships and all relationships up to the second cousin level. For all relationships, additional contextual and genealogical information is required to confirm the nature of the relationship. Why? Because the autosomal DNA can only tell you so much. You understand? And some relationships have the same autosomal percentage. So you might share 12.5% with your great grandfather, but you also might share 12.5% similarity with your third cousin. How do you differentiate that? You have to know who you're talking about. You have to have something additional to supplement that. To say, okay, yeah, this is my great grandfather Steve, and this is my cousin Antoine. You understand? This is what it's used for. Now, you notice we haven't read anywhere where it says that you can verify whether or not you descend from somebody that lived 3,000 fucking years ago. Where does it say that? Did anybody see that on the screen? And this could have all been solved if you would have set your black ass down and read. Just read. Just read. That's all you got to do is read and apply some comprehension skills. For genealogical relationships between second cousins once removed and fifth cousins, a more careful approach is necessary and data needs to be collected from multiple family members. For a relationship at the fourth cousin once removed to fifth cousin level, you may need to test 10 to 20 or more first and second cousins and see how much autosomal DNA they share with a potential fourth cousin once removed or a potential fifth cousin in order to have sufficient data to generate a statistically significant average amount of autosomal DNA that is shared among the entire group, assuming that you are dealing with a non-endogamous population. See Tim Jansen's summary at blog, and it gives you the hyperlink there. For example, for this type of quantitative approach, for endogamous populations, genealogical relationships are frequently difficult to estimate beyond about the second cousin level relationship and require careful analysis. Why is that so? Because in endogamy, people usually marry within that small group. You understand? So a lot of them are going to be a lot more genetically similar. So it's hard to distinguish who's the second cousin, third. It's hard to distinguish that if all of you guys are so closely related in that fashion. When you guys are all inbreeding or marrying within your small, close, insular group. Let's keep reading. This is important. I want you guys to use your noggin on this. Genealogical relationships beyond the fifth cousin level of relationship are more difficult to prove with autosomal DNA testing. Genealogical relationships beyond the fifth cousin level relationship are more difficult to prove with autosomal DNA testing. And as a general rule, these can only be approached using triangulation. In some cases, what do you need? Y-DNA and mtDNA data may also be of help. Why? Because autosomal DNA by its damn self cannot tell you who you came from 3,000 years ago directly. You're direct descendant. You know what DNA test does that? Y-DNA. That's your paternal line. If you want to know your mother's side, mtDNA, mitochondrial DNA. That's your matrilineal line. Now, I can end the video now. I don't have to keep going. Everything else is superfluous. You understand? That's nothing else to talk about. What else is there for me to say on this video? It's over with. I don't have to continue. That maybe took me, what, 2, 5? Read! Just read! That's all you gotta do. I'm gonna need y'all to read a damn book, man.
Read a book, read a book, read a motherfucking book. Read a book, read a book, read a motherfucking book. Read a book, read a book, read a motherfucking book. Read a book, read a book, read a motherfucking book. R-E-A-D-A-B-O-O-K. 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 Not a sports page, not a magazine, but a book, nigga. A fucking book, nigga. Not a sports page, not a magazine, but a book, nigga. A fucking book, nigga. Not a sports page, not a magazine, but a book, nigga. A fucking book, nigga. Not a sports page, not a magazine, but a book, nigga. A fucking book, nigga. Read a book, read a book, read a motherfucking book. Read a book, read a book, read a motherfucking book. Read a book, read a book, read a motherfucking book. Read a book, read a book, read a motherfucking book. R-E-A-D-A-B-O-O-K. 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 R-E-A.
All right. The message has been propagated. Read a goddamn book, man. I really don't have to keep going here, but I'm going to continue to go. I want you guys to notice something. This is what I believe if they fall thread here. And then we're going to get into the book. I want y'all to see this. Because I'm dealing with Tail Ministries, right? And you see what they're about here on their profile. I'm just going to read it real quick. Tail Ministries is a teaching ministry chosen to be part of awakening the true Hebrew Israelites to who they are, both from a biblical and historical context. Tail Ministries believe that the Negroes are the true biblical Israelites and that the Negro fulfills all prophecies concerning the Israelites. I'm not going to read the rest of this. You guys can read it on your own time. But I think this is where the problem starts. Negro. So my question would be, are all Negroes Israelites? They'd be like, no, we're not teaching that. But how do you delineate who's an Israelite? Curses. Okay, well, these people that you say fit the curses, African Americans, are not the same genetically. They have different patrilines, meaning they have different male ancestors, meaning they all can't come from Jacob. What you guys have done is said, okay, we're not going to say the word black. We're just going to put the word Israel there, or Israelite there. We're not going to say the word Negro. We're just going to put the word Israelite there. You guys are nothing. You guys are no different than the pro-African groups. You're no different than your Raborns. You're no different than your Senebs. You're no different than Dagaswa. You're no different than these guys. You think just like them. When you deal with common ancestry, we're related to people and share a common male ancestry with people that don't look like us, that are not classified the same as us. We read on another channel, we read that you can't treat DNA as ethnicity. The same way you look at ethnicity, you can't look at DNA like that. Because one is a social construct, One is based off a biological unit known as chromosomes. This is where they're fucking up at. You got to nip it at the bud. I like to call it putting the axe to the tree. Just call it right out. Using a modern social construct to try to dictate who an Israelite is. That's not how it works. Because when I say Israelite, I'm not talking about a religious term. I'm not talking about someone who joined the pack or someone who follows the laws, rites, and rituals. I'm not saying that. I'm specifically saying a descendant of Jacob. How do you determine a male descendant? By his Y chromosome. There's no way around that. You can preach until the cows come home. You can sit up here and give you a faulty misreading of fucking scriptures. You can do that all day. It's not going to change that empirical fact. The only way you can get your Y chromosome is through a man, because men have Y chromosome. It's a sex-determining chromosome. If you have it, you're a male. Males transmit their Y chromosome to their son. That's the only way you can get it. So if you're haplogroup G, your father was haplogroup G. His grandfather was haplogroup G, all the way to the archfather that first introduced haplogroup G. There's no way around that. I'm haplogroup E. I go back to a man that had haplogroup E in times past. There's no way around that. We're not directly related. Now, let's get into this book. And speak. Yeah, we not trans. Ain't no such thing as trans haplogroups. Y'all trying to be a part of the alphabet gang, LGBTQTT? Is that what y'all trying to do? Trans haplogroups now? TH? You gonna add TH to that? You on camera saying one of Jacob's sons could be haplogroup R. The hell is wrong with you, man? The only way his son can have a different haplogroup than him, a different letter assignment than him, is if his wife cheated on him. That's it. That means his wife or one of his wives got impregnated by a man other than him. But since you don't read, you don't study this information, you make bogus claims like that and run with it like, oh, we look at the data, not you. You guys don't look at the data. Give me a break, man. That's why on my channel, I'm going to eliminate all you over dogmatic religious niggas. All you niggas in trouble. All you niggas gonna get it. If it come across me and it come across my desk and I see it, your ass is getting checked. Because I don't stand for it. I don't give a damn if you're an Israelite. Oh, they're Israelites. Why would you talk about it? Why them niggas go online with their stupidity? Why do they broadcast their stupidity then? No one's checking them on broadcast and stupidity, but you're getting mad at people and individuals that are checking them because you're so enamored by these people. You're enamored by it. This is how you start joining cults. This is how a cult is formed. You're so enamored by someone, you can't see the faults and errors in their ways. Let me share my screen. And we're going to go to Google Play Books. To a book known as The Family Tree Guide to DNA Testing and Genetic Genealogy. And we're going to deal with the types of tests. We're going to deal with two. First, we're going to read autosomal DNA testing to teach you and educate you more on what autosomal DNA testing entails and what it can actually do. See, these people just say, well, you should just go off autosomal DNA. And they don't even explain to you what autosomal DNA represents. What is it about? How its usage, its functionality. They just throw buzzwords out there and hope, that will just win you over. Y'all got to demand more from people as a community, man. I'm getting on the community now. All a nigga got to do is tell you that he an Israelite, and everything he says is A1 with you, right? Because he an Israelite. Give me a fucking break. All right. Here's the book here. Oh, before I get into it, I said I'm glad I'm reminding myself. So the author, because you know what the statement is, you guys should just get a geneticist. Negro, I'm reading the works of the geneticist. This is a geneticist right here. Blaine T. Bettinger is a PhD genealogist that has a what do you call it? He's an expert in genetics. Has his PhD. So when they say get a geneticist, Negro, you just don't want to read. What y'all niggas want is videos. I look at y'all. I check your channel out. I see y'all say something. It's always a video. You niggas is always clicking videos. How about you take 10 minutes out your day and just start reading and work that brain muscle? Just read, man. You niggas is allergic to reading. Be that as it may, Blaine T. Bettinger, you can look him up. You can see his credentials. Now, we're going to go back to autosomal DNA testing. It says you send away a saliva sample or cheek swab to one or more of the major testing companies. And it lists them. We all familiar with these: 23andMe, Ancestry DNA, Family Tree, so on and so forth, MyHeritage. For autosomal DNA tests, and you just received your results. What do you do now? What do these results mean? And how do you use them to advance your genealogical research? So I advise you guys buy this book, $20, and just, do something crazy, out of the norm. Read, do something different for a change. Within just the past few years, tens of millions of people have taken autosomal DNA tests at one of these major testing companies. And with more people taking these tests and entering into the company's databases, it's easier than ever to find genetic matches and search for common ancestors. In this chapter, we'll review the fundamental concepts needed to understand autosomal DNA test results and some of their functions, such as cousin matching. We just read that, right? You can figure out if they're your cousin, they share 12.5% of your autosomes. Oh, okay, that could be your cousin, right? We'll also review autosomal DNA tools offered by the testing companies and how to use these tools to find common ancestors and answer genealogical questions. So somebody would like, oh, it says common ancestors here. Yes, you do have people. The people you share 12.5% with autosomes, you do share common ancestors. But you can't pinpoint them. This can be any ancestor. It's not like a Y-DNA test where you can say, okay, I got this Asian DNA from this man that lived in the 1800s. Example of that is we showed a Mexican man on the channel. I don't know if y'all remember this. He was EU290. 1% of his DNA was sub-Saharan African. 1%. Majority was like East Asian, some Native American, Indian, but only 1% autosomal DNA. He only inherited 1% from his patrilineal or whoever his great-grandfather was, or, beyond that. So, yes, you share autosomal DNA, common ancestors. If you have a Pacific Islander listed under your ancestry estimate, that means you share DNA. You have a common ancestor that has some Pacific Islander DNA. That doesn't mean you directly descend from them. This is general, which we're going to get into a little later. It gives you a visual aid here on what these autosomes look like. Notice one is the biggest, and then the smallest is chromosome 22. It says 22 sets of human chromosomes are considered autosomal DNA. The 23rd pair, the sex chromosome, determine gender, among other traits. What is autosomal DNA? Autosomal DNA refers to the 22 pairs of non-sex chromosomes found within the nucleus of every cell. The autosome chromosomes or autosomes vary in length, and when they are visualized, such as in image A, they are numbered approximately in relation to their sizes, with autosome 1 being the largest, autosome 22 being the smallest. Autosomal inheritance. So how do you inherit autosomal DNA? Where does it come from? How do you get it? Autosomal DNA, unlike mitochondrial DNA and Y chromosomal DNA, is inherited equally from both parents. So this should tell you right here, this is why you can't use autosomal DNA. If you're using a noggin, you can't use autosomal DNA because it's not directly tying you to anything. You get it from your mother and your father. as opposed to Y DNA and mitochondrial DNA. Y DNA from the male line, mitochondrial DNA from the female line. It's distinct. Autosomal DNA is not unique and distinct. So you can't make the statement of, well, I know I'm from Jacob because I got this autosomal percentage. You look like a jackass. Accordingly, an individual gets one chromosome in each chromosome pair from mom and one chromosome in each chromosome pair from dad. Unfortunately, since chromosomes are not labeled or marked in a way that easily identifies which parent they come from, the results of a single autosomal DNA genetic genealogy test alone cannot identify the specific source of the piece of DNA. Let me read that again, because maybe some of y'all are slow. Maybe some of y'all just want me to go read Deuteronomy 28 right now and lull you to sleep. Maybe some of y'all didn't catch that. The results of a single autosomal DNA genetic genealogy test alone, key words here, cannot identify the specific source of a piece of DNA. Now we're going to get into why. A child inherits his entire DNA from his parents, about 50% of his DNA from his mother, and about 50% of his DNA from his father. However, the child is not inheriting all of his parents' DNA. Instead, he's only inheriting half of his parents' total DNA and leaving half of it behind. This occurs at every generation, meaning that as we go back in time, we inherit less DNA from ancestors at each generation. And it gives you an illustration of that. Copy from dad, copy from mom on chromosome 1. You receive one copy of each chromosome from each parent. Then it gives you how the autosomes decrease in time. So 50%, that's your first degree relative. And as you go deeper in time, it drops. So grandpa or great-grandpa, you're only going to be 12.5% similar. Your grandfather, 25%. Then your father, 50%, right? So that's how that works. And these are general numbers, but roundabout, this is how much genetic similarity you're going to have with these groups of individuals. First degree relative is always going to be 50%. That includes your siblings. Less ancestral DNA is inherited at each generation, meaning that autosomal DNA disappears over time. This is another reason why you can't use autosomal DNA to track and see if you directly descend from somebody 3,000 years ago, 4,000 years ago. In image C, Riley inherits only half of his parents' DNA, 25% of each of his grandparents' DNA, and just 12.5% of each of his great-grandparents' DNA. Although not shown in the image, Riley would inherit just 6.25% of each of his great-great-grandparents' DNA, and so on. It should be noted that the percentages are averages across the population instead of absolutes for any given individual. Thus, while on average an individual will inherit 25% of his DNA from each grandparent, in practice the percentages will vary. For example, here's a graph of observed percentages of DNA received from 4 grandparents for 2 siblings' grandchildren. So as expected, 25%, the grandson 1 got 28%. Grandson 2 got 23% from his paternal grandfather. Grandmother expected 25. The first grandson got 22%. The second grandson got 26%. And you can see the variance in this. So 25% is a rough estimate, but normally it's within the ballpark. That's the number you're going to get from your grandparent. Although each will average 25% and the DNA from all 4 grandparents will add up to 100%, the range of grandson 1 is 22 to 28, and the range of grandson 2 is 17.7 to 32.3%. Due to the inheritance pattern seen above, it is possible to determine how much DNA an individual is likely to share with its close relatives. For example, if a grandchild and a grandparent both take an autosomal DNA test, they should share on average about 25% of their DNA. Similarly, if an individual and his aunt both take an autosomal DNA test, they should share on average about 25% of their DNA. So the same thing applies with an aunt. That would apply to a grandparent. They share about the same amount of autosomes. Then they give you a nice little chart breaking this down. As you can see, uncle and aunt will, give you about roughly 25%. Grand uncle and aunt will give you about the same thing as a grandmother, 12.5%. I mean, not grandmother, grandfather. So this is a nice chart to go by, and then you see how much you're related to your third cousin, 0.391%, so on and so forth. First cousin removed, 6.25%, so on and so forth. So you can see that. But as you can see, you share the same amount with your father and mother and brother and sister. These are first degree relatives. Then as you can see, your niece and nephew will be 25%. So it decreases over time. That's the point. And as you get to the source, it's the greatest, which is about 50%. This is how paternity tests work. If you share 50% genetic similarity, like, okay, this is the parent, right? And the additional information, we'll know, okay, this guy's way older than you, or, the mother came and identified the father, so on and so forth. Because remember, a brother and a sister can share that same amount of DNA. All right, it says you can predict what percentage of DNA you're likely to share with relatives based on autosomal DNA inheritance patterns. ImageD shows how much DNA in percentages an individual is predicted to share with close relatives. The percentage for each relationship can be found in the red boxes. As with the other percentages above, this chart only represents the average percentage of DNA shared with relatives. The actual amount of DNA shared with a relative can vary quite a bit. Recombination. One important factor to consider when taking the autosomal DNA test and interpreting results is the process of recombination. Before a chromosome is passed down to the next generation, it undergoes recombination, in which a paternal chromosome pair optionally exchanges pieces of DNA during meiosis, a natural specialized process in which cells divide as eggs and sperm are created for reproduction. Before we dig into recombination, it might be helpful to review meiosis to understand how and when recombination can occur. Meiosis occurs so that cells can divide their DNA amongst their daughter cells during gamete, i.e. sperm or egg, production. And the cell duplicates its chromosomes very early in meiosis. Normally, every cell has 23 pairs of chromosomes, 22 pairs of autosomes, and 1 pair of sex chromosomes, for a total of 46 chromosomes. However, in the first step of meiosis, the chromosomes are duplicated, resulting in a total of 92 chromosomes. Look at E, for example. The cell will duplicate its DNA so it has 4 copies of chromosome. 1, 2 copies of the chromosomes from the person's mother and 2 copies of the chromosome from the person's father. Similarly, the cell will have 4 copies of chromosome 2, and so on. As the now duplicated chromosomes line up to be split into daughter cells, recombination can occur between any of the 4 copies of the chromosomes, such as chromosome 1. As strand of chromosomes overlap, should chromosomes' genetic material cross over, some DNA may be exchanged between them, possibly resulting in a genetic variance. And once meiosis and any recombination event is complete, the daughter cells will randomly receive just one of the 4 chromosome copies, meaning 3 copies, 2 of them identical, will be left behind. Note that the recombination events may or may not be detectable based in part on what chromosomes crossed over genetic information. If recombination occurs between 2 paternal copies of the chromosome or between the 2 maternal copies of chromosome 1, between sister chromatids, that is, between the 2 blue paternal chromosomes or between 2 pink maternal chromosomes, there is no detectable change because they are identical copies. However, if recombination occurs between paternal and maternal chromosome, between non-sister chromatids, that is between the blue paternal chromosome and pink maternal chromosome, a detectable crossover occurs. So this is all technical jargon to let you know what happens when your mother and father gives you their chromosomes. They're given copies, and not all those copies are inherited, as we just read. Let's keep going. It gives you an illustration of what we just talked about, homologous chromosomes, the blue representing the paternal, pink representing the maternal. So during meiosis, each pair of chromosomes, 1 copy from one mother and 1 from the father, duplicates itself, producing 4 total copies to each chromosome. In this image, DNA inherited from father is blue, and the DNA from the mother is in pink. Recombination occurs when DNA from neighboring chromosomes cross over and exchange genetic information. As you can see in the illustration, you see the blue bar is getting a little bit of the pink, which is coming from the mother's autosomes, and then vice versa. You can see the bottom bar, the pink is getting a little bit of the blue. That's the DNA exchanging and recombining. as the gametes are created, which in turn created you. So recombination occurs when DNA from neighboring chromosomes cross over and exchange genetic information. Recombination happens randomly. Each cell division can result in different amount of recombination events or no recombination events at all. It is unusual for more than a handful of recombination events for a single chromosome to occur. However, interestingly, females tend to have more recombination events over the entire set of 22 autosomes than males do. The following example demonstrates the passage of a autosomal DNA from a paternal grandmother, Agatha, to her granddaughter, Courtney. This represents a single recombination event when the father, Benny, created the sperm. Note, although Agatha's DNA underwent recombination when she created the egg that will become her son, Benny, that recombination would only be detected by comparing her DNA to her ancestors. Image H compares Courtney's first 5 chromosomes to Agatha's first 5 chromosomes, the DNA shared by both in green. Comparing the two women's autosomal DNA can tell us a lot about how autosomal DNA is inherited and recombined across generations, as recombination must have occurred in regions where the women don't share DNA. Chromosome 1, for example, suggests there were 2 recombination events at each place on the chromosome where 2 women differ, indicated in image I. There may also have been 3rd recombination at the end of the chromosome, as the woman don't share the region as well. And they give you an illustration of that. We're not going to spend too much time on this. This is more technical jargon on explaining recombination. Autosomal DNA is transmitted from one generation to the next, regardless of each family member's gender. Autosomal DNA testing allow test takers to compare the autosomal DNA to that of an ancestor. Here, their DNA Courtney shares with her grandmother, Agatha, on her first 5 chromosomes is green. So how do we explain the differences between them? Where did the recombination events occur? Before the father passed down a copy of chromosome 1 to his daughter, his maternal and paternal copies of chromosome 1 crossed over at least 2 different locations. And when Benny's DNA was split up into his daughter's cells, the copy with genetic material matching his mother at the location in green was passed on to the cell that becomes Courtney. Note, the other copy of the chromosome would look just the opposite when compared to Agatha's DNA with the shared green segment in the middle. However, Courtney didn't inherit this copy of the chromosome. And they give you the illustration there. It says a break in the segments of the DNA shared by Agatha and Courtney suggests that 2 recombination events occurred at the site indicated above, leading to differences in DNA between the 2 relatives. The shared DNA chromosome 6 between Agatha and Courtney suggests just 1 recombination event occurred at the site indicated. More illustrations here. We're going to skip this. I want to get past this, but it's telling you basically general information about autosomal inheritance and recombination and so on and so forth. So we're going to pass this. I want to get to the good stuff. You guys can purchase this book and read this information on your own if you want to. I think this is a pertinence as well. It says here 2 family trees, as stated in chapter 1. Genealogists must actually consider 2 distinct family trees when conducting genetic research. The genealogical family tree contains every parent, grandparent, and great-grandparent through history. This is a tree that genealogists spend their time researching, often using paper records such as birth and death certificates, census records, and newspapers to fill in ancestors and information about them. The second family tree is the genetic family tree, a subset of genealogical family tree that contains only those ancestors who contributed to the test taker's DNA. Not every person in the genealogical family tree contributed a segment of their DNA sequences to the test taker's genome. In fact, the genetic tree is only guaranteed to contain both biological parents, each of the 4 biological grandparents, and each of the 8 biological great-parents. But with each generation, it is much less likely that every person in a generation contributed a piece of their DNA to the test taker's DNA. Now, I want you guys to pay attention. Use your noggin. This is why you can't rely on autosomal DNA. This is another reason why. Because the further you go back in time, like I keep saying, after that 5th and 8th generation, you can't trace anybody past that. You can't. They just can't do it. As we just read, this is why reading is fundamental. Let me read it again. In fact, the genetic tree is only guaranteed to contain both biological parents. So that's your mother and father. Each of the 4 biological grandparents, your great grandpappy and your grandmother, right? And each of the 8 biological great grandparents. But with each generation, it's much less likely that every person in that generation contributed a piece of their DNA to the test taker's DNA. This is the limits of autosomal DNA. So to recapitulate, you can't use autosomal DNA to directly pinpoint an ancestor that lived 3,000, 4,000 years ago. You can use autosomal DNA to determine stuff like paternity and like sibling tests because you will share over 50% similarity, right, with autosomes. You can't use this to say that you come from Jacob or say that, oh, well, we all come from Jacob because we share the same autosomal makeup. That doesn't mean anything. You can easily get those autosomes by marrying the women. Many of us got our sub-Saharan African autosome because, as we taught in prior episodes, we came into sub-Saharan Africa and married into the Pygmies and Bushmen and all those other tribes, the Khoisan. We're not native to sub-Saharan Africa. We're journey come lately there. That's when we pick those autosomes up. But when you look at older E markers, like the E marker that was found in the Belt Cave of Iran, its maternal DNA was U6. That's Near Eastern. Most likely, majority of its autosomes or his autosomes would have been Near Eastern. You follow? Autosomal DNA is not a test to find ancient paternal lines. It doesn't work that way. I just want to hammer that home. Now back to the reading. The difference between the 2 trees result in facts important to consider when tracing autosomal DNA inheritance. And we just read that right there. Including siblings have different genetic family trees. Other than identical twins, full siblings share only about 50% of their DNA, and half siblings share about 25% of their DNA. As a result, the siblings have many genetic ancestors in common, but there are many distant ancestors represented in one sibling's DNA that are not represented in the other sibling's DNA. How is this so? Again, this is what autosomal DNA does. These two siblings share the same mother and father, right? But their autosomal DNA is showing different common ancestors. It's because it's not a direct paternal or maternal ancestry test. It's giving you all your genetic lines. This is why you can see, are the people your people admix with. This is why you can see, if you take a DNA test, ancestry estimate, you'll see small percentages of Pacific Islanders, Native American, Indian, and stuff of that nature. That doesn't mean you directly descend from those populations. This means someone along your line, one of your lines, admixed with them. You keep reading. It says, while full siblings have the same genealogical family tree, they have different genetic family trees. They have the same genealogy. They have the same mother and father, so on and so forth. But you're seeing different genetic ancestors or DNA ancestors, as UCL UK calls them. These are not people you directly descend from. And maybe I should pull that link up again. So genealogical cousins are not always genetically related. First cousins share a strong genealogical and genetic link. They both are descended from shared grandparents and both inherit some of the same DNA from those shared grandparents. However, it is much less likely that a fifth cousin shares DNA in common, since one or both of them may not have inherited DNA from the shared ancestor. And that's another thing. You don't share, when you're doing autosomes, you don't inherit all your autosomes from all your ancestors. So, as we read earlier. So, how do you use this again to determine if someone's an Israelite again? I need someone to explain that. It says, indeed, there is roughly only 10 to 30% probability the fifth cousins will share a common DNA segment from their shared ancestors. Ethnicity is nearly impossible to predict. One of the most popular uses of autosomal DNA testing is to estimate an individual's ethnic heritage, also called ethnicity or biogeographical estimate. Chapter 9 is devoted to this issue. However, since an individual does not possess all the DNA of his ancestors, he does not necessarily represent the entire ethnicity of his ancestors, making it difficult or impossible to predict which ethnicity his DNA represents. Why is this important? What I just read. Why is this important? Because people will try to use modern ethnic groups and treat them as static ethnicities and say, well, African American composition, this is what our forefathers were. You can't do that. When you study these old haplogroup E markers, for those that are haplogroup E, they do not have the same autosomal composition as you do. Why? Just like I told you, Jacob was in the Near East. His fathers were in the Near East. They were strewing Near Eastern women. Even when they went to Egypt, they were strewing Near Eastern women. Like, you can't get around that. This is why you see those U6s and these haplogroup M's. That's why you see it. And even with L3 being in Near East, who are they strewing? Who are they reproducing with? The locals. Anyway, back to the reading. As you can see, you cannot predict, you can't use autosomal DNA to predict ethnicity. And you can't what do you call that? Retrodict this into the past as well. All right, so back to the reading. How the test works. The autosomal DNA test currently offered by 23andMe, Ancestry DNA, Family Tree DNA, so the rest of these you already know, are single nucleotide polymorphism SNP tests, meaning that they sample hundreds of thousands of SNPs, the variable nucleotides A, T, C, and G, located throughout the 22 autosomal chromosomes. Although sequencing all of an individual's DNA, called whole genome sequencing, will soon be affordable as SNP testing. The higher prices have prevented it from being offered commercially by these companies, and the future genetic genealogists are likely to purchase whole genome sequencing instead of SNP testing. When the testing companies receive the saliva samples from the test taker, it extracts the DNA and makes many copies. The company then uses the test taker's amplified DNA to test for the nucleotide value at each of 700,000 or more locations within the test taker's DNA. The results of the test will most often look like this. And they give you an example of that: results AAAG, position, chromosome, yada, yada. It says each line of the table represents a SNP, and the SNP somewhere in the test taker's genome. RSID stands for reference SNP cluster ID and is general reference for a SNP. The chromosome and the position columns reveal where within the genome the result is found. The result column is the value of the maternal and paternal chromosomes at that location. Without more information, however, it's not possible to determine which result is the paternal chromosome and which result is the maternal chromosome. For example, for RS12, it is impossible to know based just on this data whether mom gave the A and dad gave the G or vice versa. Additionally, since there is no order to the letters, the results can switch back and forth between rows. For example, mom may have provided A for RS12 and G for RS11. As we'll see throughout this chapter, the results of autosomal DNA tests can have several important uses. For example, the results are most often used for finding genetic relatives. People will share a segment of DNA with the test taker using autosomal DNA. So then we're going to deal with the functionality and the usage of it, right? Finding genetic cousins. This is why we go on 23andMe, you do your DNA test. They can tell you, hey, this is your second cousin, this is your third cousin, first cousin, so on and so forth. In addition to using DNA to break down genealogical brick walls, researchers often use DNA to find cousin matches among other test takers. And while many testing companies do heavy lifting for you, you still have to consider a number of factors when attempting to find and confirm genetic cousins. In this section, we'll discuss some of the factors that influence whether or not two people are genetic cousins and help you analyze the DNA cousin results each testing company provides. So again, we can see the usage of this. We can see that it's used to identify cousins. It says minimum segment length. Each of testing companies has selected a minimum segment length threshold that must be met before two people in a testing database will be flagged as sharing DNA in common. And this threshold can be key to understanding results. If the threshold is set too low, some of the individuals identified by the company will be false positives, meaning that the two test takers are either not actually related or have a shared common ancestor who lived thousands of years ago. Remember, autosomal DNA is best used for what? Within the 5th, 8 generations, right? 5th to 8 generation, 200, 300 years. So if the threshold is set too high, meaning that person that they probably share those autosomes with is too distant in the past. As if the threshold is set too high, there can be false negatives, meaning that the test takers share enough DNA segments to be true genetic relatives, but are being arbitrarily excluded from the test takers list of people sharing their DNA. Ideally, the testing company would like to identify only those individuals who share a common ancestor within the past 300 to 400 years. I just told you that. What may be called a genealogically relevant time frame, which excluding individuals who share a common ancestor more than 500 years ago. While the minimum segment threshold helps this goal, it is not perfect. 23andMe, I'll let you guys do your homework on that. It tells you what how each company does the ancestry DNA, family tree DNA, which has the most, of course, this is for family tree, but if you read it, family tree has the quote unquote, I guess, best method. Let's go here. Sharing DNA with siblings. It says you might think that DNA comparison between siblings would be straightforward, but like many topics in genetic genealogy, the answer is more complicated. How much DNA is shared by siblings raises an important distinction in genetic genealogy. Individuals who share DNA can be either half identical or fully identical. A half identical region is a portion of genome where two people share a segment of DNA on just one of their 2 chromosomes. Remember, everyone has 2 copies of each chromosome, and it is possible to share DNA with someone else on one of those copies, or in rare cases, such as siblings, on both of those copies. Accordingly, a fully identical region is a region where 2 people share segments of DNA on both copies of their 2 chromosomes. The image demonstrates HIR versus FIR shared segments. For an individual where the blue segments is the DNA shared by that taker with another test taker. And it gives you the image, half identical and fully identical. And the blue markers is the shared DNA. Half of the DNA shared by siblings is from HIR, while half of the DNA shared by siblings is from FIR. The HIR plus the FIR equals 3,400. However, 23andMe and Family Tree DNA only report half of the DNA at FIRs. Accordingly, these companies will only report about 75% of the actual amount of DNA shared by siblings. In summary, siblings are half identical on 50% of their DNA and fully identical on 25% of their DNA. Likelihood of sharing DNA. As discussed earlier, only a small percentage of genealogical cousins actually share DNA. After 7 to 9 generations, DNA is not inherited by all descendants of an ancestral couple. Read that again. After 7 to 9 generations, these are key points. I want you guys to be using your noggin here. After 7 to 9 generations. 7 to 9 generations. 7 to 9 generations. DNA is not inherited by all descendants of an ancestral couple. Further, the same pieces of DNA are not inherited by all descendants of an ancestral couple, even at the first generation. Again, this is why you can't say, oh, well, we just use autosomal DNA to determine you're Israelite. Wait a minute. Israelite is a person that descends from Jacob. And if Jacob lived 4,000 years ago, why the hell would we use this? It's only good to 7 to 9 generations. Times that by 25, 300, 400 years, somewhere around that range, right? Because a generation is 25 years. It says, in other words, a great-great-great-grandson may have inherited the only piece of DNA from his great-great-great-grandfather on chromosome 8, while the only piece of DNA a great-great-great-granddaughter inherited from the same great-great-great-great-grandfather is on chromosome 3. Although these 2 individuals are 4th cousins and both have DNA from their shared ancestors, they do not share any segments of DNA in common. To use terminology from chapter 1 in the earlier section of this chapter, they are genealogically cousins, but not genetic cousins. What is the likelihood that a genealogical cousin will share DNA for close cousins? The likelihood is very high, but it decreases rapidly. Estimates from 3 of the testing companies can give us an idea. Then they give you a graph here you guys can all see here. And as you get to the sixth cousin, it's lower, less than 5%, 11% ancestry DNA, less than 5%. As you get closer, it's a closer match. Common sense, right? It says, according to these estimates, it is essentially a guarantee that relatives at a second cousin level and closer will share detectable amounts of DNA. Indeed, there has not yet been a single confirmed case in which second cousins do not share DNA. This means that if a second cousin takes an autosomal DNA test and they don't share DNA, there is either an error in the family tree or a misattributed parentage event. For more information, see my article, Are There Any Absolutes in Genetic Genealogy? Now, I also want to say this right here about this misattributed parentage event. This is funny to me because this is what Tail Ministries and all these people that try to push this autosomal DNA is essentially doing. You're misattributing the parentage event of Jacob. If you're haplogroup G and I'm haplogroup E, one of us, we both can't be descendants of Jacob. Okay? Man. Let me keep going. Let's see. What does it say here? Share CM project. I passed that. Then it gives you a chart here, sibling, child, grandchild, and in relation to aunt, uncle, grandparents. Amount of shared DNA by two people can also help estimate the genealogical relationship between those two people, although it's not a perfect predictor. So I'm just going to skip this and get right to it. Third cousin closer. Again, you guys can pick this up as well. Oh, I do want to read this back here. What does it explain what a pseudo segment? Oh, right here. Because they were bringing out false positives by ancient DNA, and it's funny that they don't know about this. And a few missing messages of false negatives. Pseudo segments form. These small false segments are often the result of artificial weaving back and forth between maternal and paternal DNA test results. As we saw earlier in this chapter, we don't know which letter in our results come from mom and which letter comes from dad. Accordingly, the matching algorithms used by some of the testing companies allow a match to be formed by weaving back and forth between two letters, regardless of whether the match is maternal or paternal. This creates a pseudo segment. In this image, Jorge Garcia and John Doe appear to be matches, as marked in red. Jorge and John share the same nucleotides when looking at John's unphased DNA, i.e. DNA markers that haven't been sourced to John's maternal or paternal line. But once the data has been phased, John had determined which nucleotides came from his mother and which from his father. It's revealed they aren't matches at all. So that's what happens with these pseudo segments. And this is why when you go to like 23andMe, it'll tell you autosomal ancestry is 76% accurate. Not 99%, 76% accurate. And this is one of the reasons. So I want to point that out about pseudo segments and why that happens. Let me skip this. Get right to the meat and potatoes of this. Chromosome browsers. Don't want to see that. Don't want to read that. Then I'm going to get to the Y chromosome. I'm going to get to this before the night ends, I'll tell you that. MyHeritage, it explains what each company offers. And of course, since this book is about the family tree guide, family tree is going to have the best attributes. Then it shows you how to do the shared matches tools, shows how to do that, yada, yada, yada. So I think from here, we're going to go straight to other uses of autosomal DNA. It says genealogists use the results of autosomal DNA testing for two main purposes. This is what the purposes are. We're going to read what these purposes are. We're going to see if you can get a direct paternal ancestor out of this. Let's see if it says that. It says genealogists use the results of autosomal DNA testing for two main purposes: cousin matching, which we've already discussed in depth, and ethnicity analysis. Ethnicity estimates provided by testing companies attempt to break down a test taker's DNA into continental or regional sources. Although these are only estimates, they can have genealogical applications, particularly if the research question involves a recent ancestor with a distinct ethnicity. These are the uses. Determining who your cousins are. in a recent ancestor. Not a distant, a recent ancestor. This is what you use autosomal DNA for. This is what you use it for. You can't use it to say, hey, since we have the same autosomal composition, we all go back to this man that lived 4,000 years ago, which in our case will be Jacob, right? And then Abraham, right? As we read tonight, autosomal DNA does not do that. It does not pinpoint one paternal ancestor. It doesn't. From 3,000 to 4,000 years ago. It does not. These are the two primary purposes. For example, finding numerous segments of DNA that the testing company identifies as African could support a hypothesis for a recent ancestor with African ancestry. Recent, not distant, recent. We'll discuss ethnicity estimates in more details in Chapter 9. Let's see. See if there's anything of use here because I really want to get this video done. Again, it says the segments of DNA those descendants share in common, therefore are hypothesized to have come from a shared ancestor and can be pieced together to recreate portions of ancestor genome. As more descendants are tested, more pieces of ancestor DNA can be identified. Learn about health. Okay, yada yada. All right, so let's deal with the core concepts of autosomal DNA testing. Just to recapitulate, autosomal DNA refers to 22 pairs of chromosomes called autosomes. In the nucleus of the cell, a child inherits 50% of the autosomal DNA from the father and 50% of autosomal DNA from the mother. Autosomal DNA testing is done by analyzing hundreds of thousands of SNPs through the 22 pairs of chromosomes. Autosomal DNA tests are used to fish for genetic cousins by approximating how many generations have passed since the two matches share a common ancestor. The closer relationship, the better the estimate. Again, this is used for recent ancestry, not distant ancestry, as we've been pointing out. Not all genealogical cousins will share autosomal DNA. Cousins and relatives at the second cousin or closer level are always expected to share DNA. Beyond second cousin relationship, the likelihood of sharing DNA with a cousin decreases rapidly. All right. Do I want to read this DNA in action? No, I don't. No, actually, I want to read this part right here. A great-grandparent, first cousin, great aunt / uncle, niece, nephew, or half aunt, uncle, nephew. So with this right here, it says, according to the table, the 1025 cm shared by the genetic matches in Y green 3 is closest to the 12.5% of sharing and thus predicted to be a great-grandparent, first cousin, great aunt, uncle, niece, nephew, or half aunt, uncle, niece, nephew. Because again, if you don't have any supplementary information, all of these could share the same amount of genetic similarity. So it doesn't pinpoint anything without supplemental information. This is right here. Without more information, however, Allen is unable to determine the exact relationship. So I want you guys to see that as well. I don't want to read this. Now, I want to go straight from here to Y chromosome DNA testing. I'm just going to hit some quick points here. It is getting late. Again, you guys can purchase this book yourself and read this book on your own time. We advocate literacy here on this channel, and we advise you guys to read, not just watch videos. Y chromosome testing. Is that Smith ancestor born in Virginia in 1718, the son of John Smith or Hiram Smith? How many men do you have in your family tree who have no identified father, or whom after decades of research you are convinced must have been dropped on Earth by aliens? Rod Dalton, that's a Rod Dalton hint right there. That's an ode to Rod Dalton. Anyway, Y chromosome testing may be able to help you solve some of these mysteries. Since the Y chromosomes passed down along with surnames in most Western cultures, it is exceptionally useful for examining and breaking through the brick walls of our paternal lines. In this chapter, we'll learn about Y DNA and how to add this kind of testing to the genealogical toolbox. So again, Y DNA deals with the paternal line. So if we want to know anything about a paternal line, we need to look at Y chromosomes. Autosomal DNA cannot do this. Y chromosomes do that. Y chromosome is one of the 23 pairs of chromosomes found in the nucleus of a cell and is one of the two sex chromosomes. While a female has two X chromosomes and a male has one X chromosome from his mother and one Y chromosome from his father. As a result, the Y chromosome is found only in men who inherit almost entirely unchanged from their fathers. So if you got haplogroup G, your father had G, and to perpetuity. You can retro-dict that into the past. Y chromosome of Adam, and it explains that. You guys should know what that is. He's the most recent common ancestor of all humans on their paternal line. It talks about the darting out effect. That's when a man has all daughters and his Y chromosome will end. So I'm not going to read that. I want to get this point here to, touch on the unique inheritance of Y DNA. Similar to mitochondrial DNA, Y DNA has a unique inheritance pattern that makes it valuable for genetic genealogy testing. The Y chromosome is always passed down from a father to his son. Let me stop here and give commentary. Always passed down from his father to his son. So what does that mean? We can trace the paternal line with the Y chromosome. If you have haplogroup G, your father's had haplogroup G. If you have haplogroup R, your father's had haplogroup R. You descend from a male that had the basal haplogroup R, where haplogroup R first arose. That's what that tells you. So when you look at the African American community and what these people are, some of them are G, H, I, some of them are E, majority of them are E. We're not all the same genetically. We do not all share the same paternal ancestors. Therefore, if you guys are teaching the Israelite doctrine, you cannot say that we all descend from Jacob. It's that simple. And again, autosomal DNA testing is not a unique inheritance. You get it from both your parents. Y chromosome is a unique inheritance. The father cells make an exact copy of this Y chromosome and pass that down to his son through his sperm. All right. So, as a result, the Y chromosome that a father possesses will almost always be identical to the Y chromosome of his sons. This is how we know we can trace Y chromosome DNA. As you can see here, illustrated Matthew, Liam, to Kyle, to John. They all have the same Y chromosome. Y DNA is passed down on the paternal line in blue. As you can see, John passing it down, and then eventually darting out because he had a daughter that married another man, a man with a different Y chromosome, right? Then his Y chromosome passed here, boom, 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 and that Y chromosome persisted. But here he had a daughter that got with a male, and his Y chromosome ends here. This is called darting out. All right. I want to read this part here. I'm speed reading here because I want to get to the point before it gets too late. It says, for example, John has 1,024 ancestors at 10 generations. So at 10 generations, this is typical for anybody, 1,000 generations. 1,000 ancestors. Total of 512 men and 512 women. Although every one of those 512 male ancestors had a Y chromosome, only one of them passed down his chromosome to John. Now, here's the thing about this. In autosomal DNA, it's looking at a percentage of all of those ancestors. Paternal DNA, it's only dealing with one line. It's more direct and it's more unique. All right. And it talks about darting out. We discussed that. I want to get this one quote, and then I'm ending this. How the tests work. Normally, the Y chromosome is transmitted from one generation to the next, almost entirely without change. Over time, however, Y chromosomes can accumulate one or more mutation that, while typically harmless and not affecting a man's health, can be detected by tests and useful for genealogical analysis. All right, so from there, I want to go here. Again, you guys can read this yourselves. Together, the results of an individual test YSTR marker represents the individual's haplotype. The collection of specific markers result that characterize the test taker. Every male has a specific Y DNA haplotype, and generally, the more similar haplotypes of two males, the more closely related they are. The more YSTR markers that are tested, the greater the resolution of estimated relationship between the two compared males. A new naming convention called the terminal SNP is now often used for haplogroup naming. This is important. So I'm EU290. The U290 is the terminal SNP. right? So here it gives you an example. For example, the test taken maternal SNP in the R1B1A2A1A1 example is RU106, which is the most distant branch to which he can be mapped. So when you see EU290, RU106, or M269, that is the terminal SNP. That is the end of that branch. So the number of repeats at a particular OISTR can change over time at a relatively regular rate, thereby giving genealogists the ability to trace patrilineal lineages over time. So if you want to, to hell with Teo them are saying, because Teo is on camera saying Y-DNA cannot be used for descent, but that's exactly what you use, genealogists use Y-DNA for, to track patrilineal lineages over time. A father and son, for example, will almost always have the same Y-DNA haplotype. All right, and it explains mutations and whatnot. Let's see. Y-DNA markers are named by letters in the alphabet. We know that. I want this one quote, and I'm ending this right here. 1 mutation will mean a more recent common male ancestor, while 10 mutation will mean a very distant common male ancestor. SNPs in their ancestral or derived classification help define a test taker's location in the human Y-DNA haplogroup tree. The human Y-DNA tree is far from complete. New branches are constantly being discovered as more men undergo Y-DNA testing. I want to just touch on this real quick. I know I'm speed reading. I want y'all to keep up with me. They made a claim that Y-DNA testing had grinded to a halt. But as we can see here, it says the human Y-DNA haplogroup tree is far from complete. New branches are constantly being discovered as more men undergo Y-DNA testing. So they're still updating this. So again, as I pointed out in the last video, that statement was false. Bear with me, y'all. I'm just trying to speed through this because there's one page I want to read to you guys, and we're going to conclude. The big Y test, it explains what that is. The big Y test doesn't mean it's going to give you a different letter assignment or a macro haplogroup. I don't know why people are teaching that. You guys can read that on your own. Answer genealogical questions. Also, real quick, I want to make note of this. This is the best phylogenetic tree that I've seen. As you can see, A, B, D, E, and then C, F branching off, and then F branching off into the rest of the haplogroups, making up 90% of the Earth's population outside of Africa. As you can see, it doesn't really follow an alphabetic order, if you will, because as it branches off from this CT to CF, creates C and F and D and E and DE. When I was speaking to Teo Ministries, they did not understand this. They thought E progressed into F. As you can see, E is not connected to F at all. These are two separate, distinct branches. Just wanted to point that out, let that be noted. And on the updating thing, it says Y-DNA haplogroup descriptions will continue to change as scientists learn more about the Y-DNA tree. So it's not grinded to a halt, like they said. Displaying genetic distances. That right there. I want you guys to see this because it's going to touch on their claims on autosomal DNA. Sorry for doing this so late when I was dealing with jet lag. This when I got home from work. For example, Y-DNA testing can only determine whether two people are paternally related on their direct patrilineal line. So I want y'all to know that this is what Y-DNA testing is used for, direct patrilineal line. Autosomal DNA is not. It is also possible to use Y-DNA testing to determine whether you might be paternally related to an autosomal DNA match. So you can't use autosomal DNA to determine whether or not you come from Jacob. But you can say, okay, maybe we have an autosomal DNA match. Let's see if we share the same paternal ancestor. You have to supplement it with Y chromosome DNA. This is the quote I wanted you guys to hear. So I'm going to read that again. It is also possible to use Y-DNA testing to determine whether you might be paternally related to an autosomal DNA match. As we'll learn later on in the book, an autosomal DNA match can be found on any of your ancestral lines, but it is difficult to identify the common ancestors shared with an autosomal DNA match. You see that? So you can't just use autosomal DNA and say, okay, yeah, this is Jacob. No, you need to supplement it with Y chromosomes because Jacob's a male. We're trying to trace a male lineage. It's that simple. If that autosomal DNA matches also shares your Y DNA or the Y DNA of a paternal relative, then you can significantly narrow down which lines to search for a common ancestor. All right, it's more specific, more unique using Y DNA. Autosomal DNA is all your ancestral lines. This is why you see these different percentages of European, African, Pacific Islander, East Asian, so on and so forth. Finding biological ancestors. That's another usage of Y chromosomes. Then we're going to deal with core concepts of Y chromosome and Y DNA testing. The Y chromosome is one of the two sex chromosomes. Only men possess a Y chromosome, and a father passes down his Y chromosome to only his sons. As a result of this unique inheritance pattern, Y DNA is only used to examine a test taker's paternal line. Y DNA testing is done by either sequencing short regions of Y chromosomes, YSTR testing, or through SNP testing, Y-SNP testing of the Y chromosome. The result of any Y DNA test can be used to determine the paternal haplogroup or ancient origins of the paternal line back thousands of years. Remember, autosomal DNA is only 7 to 9 generations. Y DNA, thousands of years. So if we're going to determine who descends from Jacob, the best, the most parsimonious explanation and use and tool for that would be Y DNA testing, not autosomal DNA testing, which is limited and is ambiguous. We just read, in order to determine if someone or narrow down what ancestor that you share with someone that has autosomal DNA similar to you, is to look at the Y chromosome. You have to supplement it with a sex chromosome. It's the only way. All right, so let me continue to read. It says YSTR tests estimate the paternal haplogroup, while Y-SNP tests definitively determine the paternal haplogroup. The results of YSTR sequencing tests can be used to fish for genetic cousins. Since the Y chromosome mutates relatively rapidly at a well-characterized rate, YSTR testing is very good at finding random genetic matches and testing company database and estimating how many generations have passed since two men shared a common and paternal ancestor. Y DNA test results can be useful for examining specific genealogical questions such as whether two people are or are not paternally related. And that's the point. If you want to know, we posit that Jacob was a real man. He had a Y chromosome. The only way we can determine that, if we descend from that person, then we have to say, okay, what haplogroup would he have had? We look at source populations like the Akkadians. We look at source population like the Natufians. They had E. Okay, we put the Shem stamp on him. He would have to come from here. He would have to have the macro haplogroup E, who has E. Then we build our parsimonious models through that. We don't use autosomal DNA, which is limited, that can't go back thousands of years ago. That is a very ambiguous and general genetic testing. And it only can be used for recent relatives, not distant relatives. And that's my recapitulation. The test you need for paternal ancestry is Y DNA testing, not autosomal DNA. All right. Any questions? Any questions? I'll give y'all about a minute to think of something. Let me see. Let's see what's in the comments. Does anybody have to get the boot today in the comments? Let me look. Let's see. Let's see. I know, right? They doing the same thing with Tail Ministries. Oh, how dare you talk about R. Kelly? Can't talk about anybody because the Israelites. Oh, the Israelites. We shouldn't say anything about that. Hey, get the fuck off my channel. You know what I'm saying? Avery says simple and to the point. Yeah. Yeah, man. I just speed read through that. I'm not trying to be on here at 1 o'clock tonight. I gotta go to work in the morning. You guys can purchase that book for $20 and go through each test and read yourselves. I actually read those 2 chapters in its entirety before I got on here. But I want to give you guys the highlights and not bore you with all the technical jargon. Get straight to the point. Autosomal DNA is general. Why DNA is unique and distinct, and that's how you determine direct paternal lineage. So the most stingy explanation is, yeah, Kevin G didn't understand what that term meant. Where are the origins of haplogroup G? I actually have a source, and Eva, you have this source as well. It's called Ethno-Linguistic Prehistory by George L. Van Drym. And he talks about prehistoric Europe in the presence of Y chromosomal G2A, which was there. So haplogroup G was definitely in Europe. And then the Caucasus as well. But I like to point out the Europe because, you know, most likely African Americans, if they have haplogroup G, is, you know, through a slave owner or a European migrant that came over here and mixed and had a child with an African American woman. It's that simple. And that line just persisted till today's time. So anyway, so I can just read something real quick on that, and then I'll call it a show. I will call it a show. With that, you guys should have a general idea of this, the purpose of autosomal DNA and why chromosomal DNA and why Teo Ministries is wrong. You clearly see you cannot use autosomal DNA as they propose. Okay, so let me share this with you guys, give you a little bonus content. What haplogroup is likely Afro-Asiatic in origin, haplogroup G or haplogroup E? It definitely ain't haplogroup G. I'll tell you that. That's a no-go on that one. Let's see. So this is Ethno-Linguistic Prehistory by George L. Van Drym, and this is page 21. And this is dealing with the migration and population replacement in prehistoric Europe. It says modern Swiss people are not overly bothered by the fact that the early inhabitants of their country and of the surrounding regions of Western European heartland before the Battle of Bibracte, 58 BC, and even long afterwards were Celt-speaking languages that were neither ancestral nor very much like the languages spoken in the country today. At a greater time depth, new research on ancient DNA tells us even greater discontinuities in the population history of Switzerland. Frank Wangler reported that Y chromosomal haplogroup G2A was found at Oberbip, dating from circa 300 BC, whereas Y chromosomal haplogroup I predominated the collective grave at Spreitenbach, dating to the 25th century BC, and Y chromosomal R made its debut at a later site, such as Sengen, the cemetery site dating from 21st century BC. So all these F89 lineages were running around in pre-Europe, and this is one of the reasons why we designate the FM89 lineages as Japhet, because in the book, in Josephus's works, it states that the first people to come and settle Europe after the redistribution of humans after the flood would have been Japhet. And we can see the most ancient peoples of prehistory Europe would be people like I, would be people like G, would be people like R. These are all FM89 lineages. It says here, from the 7th to the 4th millennium, the paternal lineage G2A was also prevalent in the Carpathian Basin. This is most likely, Teo Ministries background. One of these Europeans, descendants of these Europeans, came over here, maybe in the antebellum South, maybe in the North, maybe somewhere else, and mixed with an African woman, and that paternal line persists to this day and created the Teo twins. That's all. I mean, no one's going to bash you across the head about that. That's just factual. If you're a G2A, then you most likely descend from one of these Europeans. That's all. And we can see that they have an ancient presence in not the Levant, and the Carpathian Basin. It says here, similarly on Crete, the Minoan Mycenaean cultures were established by pioneers bearing paternal lineage J. And we know the ancient Greeks, Minoans, and stuff of that nature would have been Japhet. The Greeks would have been Javan. And we know they have been associated with Japhet. And we see haplogroup J. So it's consistent with our model that these haplogroups would have all fell into the Japhetic line. It says into a rim where paternal lineage G2 had previously been predominant. So G2 is also, we see here in Crete, the Minoans, Mycenaeans, which we all know, according to our literature, according to our writings, would be considered Japhet. All right, that's enough on that, man. That's just bonus content for you. You know what I'm saying? They blocked you too, bro. They in their feelings. They blocked me on social media, shaking my head, crybabies, man. It's all love, but they were super wrong. They have too many followers to be given to the pseudoscience. That's how they got that many followers, bro. You have a love of, anti-intellectualism here, bro. Like, that's just how it goes. All right, man. If you guys don't have any questions, yeah, Ozzy the Iceman in Italy, right. Yeah, Orthodox Moore brought that up earlier. These are descendants of Europeans, bro. It is what it is, man. But you're not gonna get on here and expect to get no pushback after making all of those erroneous claims. And again, I read directly from the source material. Everybody saw that, as we always do. Y'all know my MO, man. 7 gang, source gang over everything. You know I'm rocking, man. Let's get it.
Another
Mike Diesel
production.
Knocking those rhymes, showing toss of rhyme. Knocking those rhymes, showing toss of rhyme. Knocking those rhymes, showing toss of rhyme. I'ma come through and show my wit line. Knocking those rhymes, showing toss of rhyme. Knocking those rhymes, showing toss of rhyme. Knocking those rhymes, showing toss of rhyme. I'ma come through and show my wit line. Knocking those rhymes. I'ma come through and and show my what kind. Knocking those times. I'ma come through and show my what kind. Knocking those times, showing toss of rhyme. Knocking those times, showing toss of rhyme. Knocking those times, showing toss of rhyme. I'ma come through and show my what kind. Knocking those times. I'ma come through and show my what kind. Knocking those times, showing toss of rhyme. Knocking those times, showing toss of rhyme. Knocking those times, showing toss of rhyme. I'ma come through and show my what kind. Knocking those times.
Hey, check this out, man. If you're going to get on a public platform, run your damn mouth and speak against something, stand on it in the public, man. Don't be trying to reach out in the background. Oh, I don't got nothing against y'all, man. Fuck you niggas, man. That's my message to y'all. Anybody don't like it, y'all know what y'all can do. Y'all know where I'm at. That's it. That's my message to y'all, man. This 7 Candlesticks Up, and I've been telling you niggas, it ain't a debate. It's a stick up game.